Now, this next section, remember, we did a switch. It's going to be getting it done. This is the section called getting it done. What's it called? Getting it done. Getting it done. So we've got a special treat, really super special treat. Got a guest speaker. So he'll speak to us about that. This is about getting it done. It's about really the entrepreneurial process. The gentleman I want to bring up here, his name is Larry Pino. What's his name? Larry Pino. This is an amazing man. I'll give you, I keep the whole session talking about the background. First of all, Larry is a business and investment attorney. That's his day job. He's also founder of a private equity firm where they're developing an assisted living center all over the state right now. He's an entrepreneur of phenomenal means, and he's a speaker. Hasn't been on the stage much in recent years, but in the past he's spoken to over 1 million people on legal and investment topics. He's been involved in starting and developing 70 to 80 different businesses. He's sold over $1.5 billion with a B of product and services employing over 2,000 people. One business, he managed to 9 figures in less than 10 years, 9 figures revenue per year, and all his businesses have been startups. They start from scratch. In his spare time, he's adjunct professor at Rollins College, where he teaches a course called Rapid Enterprise Development. And I found this quote that Larry had on the internet. I want to share this with you. This is really appropriate. He said, "I've always loved every aspect of business. I love the envisioning, operating, and the opportunity for creating a great output. Maybe the best way I can describe it is I really do see business as a block of clay. I may not be terribly artistic, but I can clearly embrace what a sculptor does with a block of clay, with a hammer or mallet, slowly chipping away, being able to then step back and see how this thing is coming along. And then being able to go back in and look more. And so what you end up with is a real work of art, something beautiful and whole. That's the way I see business. I see a business as an opportunity for creative expression, not only the nitty-gritty of it, most importantly with respect to what it takes to make this thing into a wonderful piece of art. He's also my friend and mentor. Please welcome Mr. Larry Pino. Give me a round of applause.
Thank you. So, thank you very much, Larry. So I take it I'm on. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, thanks so much for the.
Turn you on. Sorry.
Oh, turn me on.
All right. Now you're on.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Well, thanks for the invitation. And so what Lance didn't tell me is it is the time right after lunch. So I'll do my very best to keep you awake throughout this process. He also didn't tell you that when he was in my office the other day on, I guess it was it yesterday?
Yesterday.
Oh, yesterday. And I said, so Lance, I'd be very happy to talk to your boot camp. I said, what would you like me to talk on? And he said, what I really want you to talk on is mindfulness, success mindset, principles of success. And I said, oh, okay. So since I do legal topics and like how to structure your LLC and all that kind of stuff, I said, oh, okay. So I think I better put together some PowerPoints. So I actually this morning with Kieran, who's in my office, actually put together some PowerPoints for you on the ideas behind sort of maybe some successful living. I call them sort of attributes of successful living in business as well as in life. So we'll kind of get through that in just a second. By the way, as I was listening to that, I was trying to recognize myself in all of those accolades. I was getting goosebumps, man. I was impressed with myself. So I just want you to know how really impressed I am with myself at this point, and it's okay. About a third of it is true, and the rest of it, no. Thank you very much, Lance. So let me just kind of talk about this. And really, that is, by the way, a real quote, because that is the way that I see enterprise. It's the way that I see entrepreneurship. The way that I see it, it is probably, I can't sing to save my life. My family can tell you that. I can't paint. Somewhere along the line, I tried to draw a stick man when I was a high school senior, and I failed. So, but when it comes to entrepreneurship, it's the opportunity to be able to see a particular thing in your mind and to have the opportunity to be able to create it in real life, to actualize it in real life, and to be able to sit back and look at that and say, okay, so what do I have to do now? And that's how I came up with that metaphor. And you just sort of chisel at it a little bit, and then you sit back and you look at it and you say, that's pretty good. How about this? And then you go back and you chisel it some more. And that's really what has happened in my entire career. I started off as my professional career. I graduated from law school, went to Notre Dame, and then graduated NYU Law School. And I was already doing business in college at Notre Dame. I was bootlegging firecrackers from Tennessee because, we had great, as Lance knows, a Notre Dame grad, we had great pep rallies, as I'm sure many colleges do across the country. And these pep rallies needed firecrackers. So my roommate and I drove down to Tennessee. We took the seats out of his car, and we loaded up on firecrackers. And we started selling firecrackers on the Notre Dame College campus before they almost expelled me. And so then, since I couldn't sell them on the campus anymore, I started selling firecrackers in South Bend to all the locals. So before they almost arrested me, I finally decided that I have to get serious. And by the way, don't be terribly impressed, because while I was doing these firecrackers, there was a guy named Bill Gates who was doing another entrepreneurial activity at a place called Harvard. And so firecrackers for Larry Pino, Microsoft. So I wouldn't be terribly impressed with my history if I were you. So that's it. But in truth, it really has been a succession of startups. And I think that one of the reasons that I like startups the most is because, you can build it in your image and likeness. The opportunity, anytime that you're involved with something else, you can't build it in your image and likeness. But when you're an entrepreneur, you get to be able to see it in your mind and actualize it in reality. And based on that, it has been a wonderful experience. So I have, in fact, been involved in some 70 or 80, and everyone has gotten slightly larger over time. And as Lance mentioned to you, the most recent involvement was, by the way, very similar, very similar. Mom, my dad passed away, and my mother was fine until she wasn't. And there came a time in which she wasn't that well at all. So we got 24/7 care, and in the house we had gotten 7 minutes away from us here in Winter Park. And 24/7 care was fine until there comes a time in which all of her friends are passing away one by one. So the only people she saw was us. So she would see us on weekends, on Saturday and Sunday, but otherwise all day long it was caregiver and my mother all day long. And so when I took a look at attempts to socialize her, not socialize her, but give her socialization with other people, I would go out to the assisted living facilities in town to try to figure out, what does it look like? And, I'd walk away saying, not in a million years. I'm not going to put my mother there, not in a million years. So being the way I am, in 2010, I literally, after having done that for 6 months straight, I sat down and we were sitting as a family, my wife and kids, and I asked the question, I said, what would it need to look like? What would it really need to look like for me to put my mother in that type of community? And I remember mid-July of 2010, going over to the corner, pulling out a yellow pad and a pen, and then writing down what it would have to look like. Well, you know what? I would want high ceilings, and I would want lots of vertical light, and I would want natural herbs near the door, like rosemary and basil. And I would want to have, that Italian roof line, and so forth. And after pages and pages of what it would have to look like, I looked down at it, and out of the page emerged this concept, which I called Tuscan Gardens. And Tuscan Gardens became the concept that I began working on from that point on to put in reality the concept of what I saw in my mind as an opportunity to be able to put my mother. And that's really where it began. So of course, fortunately now, we've got 5, we've got 1 operationalized, and we have 1 that's in Venice, Florida. And we have 1 under construction in Palm Coast, and We're closing in March on the one in Delray Beach. And we got one getting ready to go in Forest Acres, Columbia, South Carolina. And we now have one contracted. We hope to close in October of this year. For those of you from Orlando, at Lake Eola, Tuscan Gardens at Lake Eola, which will be our 5th. And it all came from asking a fundamental question. What would it have to look like? And that's really the entrepreneurial component of being able to go from a vision in your mind to something that's in reality, that's something that's out there that you can actually point to and say, you know what, we did that. We created that. And it's created, if you will, best way I can say it is in your own image and likeness. So in any event, with that, I just wanted to, obviously it's a short session of 45 minutes, but I jotted down some notes for you that represent what I sort of consider to be some cardinal principles of success, and which I'm very happy to share with you, especially because the massive amount of time that I spent preparing for this. But I'll certainly be glad to share these with you. So I just have to know how to do that. So there's okay. Okay. Okay, got it.
And one of those will unblank the screen. There you go.
Okay, and then just going forward, it's the one on the...
Forward to back.
Okay, great. So in any event, I call it attributes of successful living, in both business and in life. And I really kind of consider them to be 7 altogether that pretty much capture certainly what has worked for me and what kind of tend to be relatively cardinal principles in the way that I see life. The first one is what I call a commitment to personal responsibility. And when I talk about that with you, and I have just 3 bullet points underneath it that I'll get to in a second. But what I want you to recognize is that the level of personal responsibility, I know that sometimes when you think about personal responsibility for stuff, you tend to think of it in terms of, taking the blame for something, or, hey, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. Hey, the reason this happened is because of what that guy did over there. It's not me that actually created this thing. The commitment to personal responsibility is exactly the opposite of that. I start from a premise that says, if it happened, it's because I created it. And I start with a recognition that everything that has happened, I have created. Now, I'm not talking about necessarily matters which are divine, right? But I'm talking about in the affairs of mankind. Easiest thing to do is to look at a particular outcome. And when you look at that outcome, you can ask yourself a question very simple. Is that the outcome that I wanted to have? And if it is the outcome that I wanted to have, that's all you have to do is do the same behavior again, and you'll get that same outcome. But if it's not an outcome that you're pleased with, then the easiest thing to do is to change your behavior, and you will get a different outcome. But the only way that you can actually factor yourself into that type of calculus is by recognizing that you were the cause of it to start with. Because if you weren't the cause, then you wouldn't have the ability to change the outcome. And so by taking responsibility for absolutely everything that happens in your life, you give yourself the opportunity to be able to create outcomes which are the way that you want them to look. And it allows you to be self-corrective along the way. Personal responsibility is just simply understanding yourself to be the cause of everything that happens in your life. And as long as you allow yourself to be that, then you allow yourself to create outcomes. On a day-by-day basis, I mean, and I have the value, of course, because I'm both practicing lawyer. I represent Lance, and at a select group of clients because I'm fairly busy, and so they're clients that matter and are doing wonderful things in their lives. So I do have the opportunity, over the years, to have represented clients and some that stayed clients and some that I invited to not be clients along the way. And then I've also had an opportunity to be able to work with people who are in business. And you get into, matter of fact, I got into a conversation the other day with a particular accounting firm, which absolutely, I mean, these are very bright people, and they're sitting at my table in my office. And we get through a conversation because they absolutely butchered income tax returns. They butchered income tax returns like you would not believe. And this is a large accounting firm. And I had a partner sitting at my desk telling me, and she literally said, that she had reviewed everything that had happened, and she couldn't think of anything that she could have done differently. And I just, and I didn't I didn't show what I'm showing you now. I tried to be professional and all of that, but I was absolutely floored. Because I just simply said, well, her name. I said, it really isn't that difficult. Is this the outcome that you wanted to have happen? And she said, no, obviously not, because it was a mess. So I said, she says, obviously not. Okay. So if this is not the outcome that you would have wanted to have, and you did prepare the tax returns, then would you replicate everything you just did for this same outcome? And she said, well, no. Right. So what would you do differently next time to achieve a different result? And she was just silent. And I said, now let me tell you what I would do differently next time so that this never happened. And I said, because I never want this outcome to occur again, so what I would do is I would increase my communication with your firm to make sure that you're clear with respect to the scope of your responsibilities. I would provide milestone management to make sure that your milestones are being created so that you don't have to rush in the end to get it done. I would make sure that I made myself available. And I gave her like 3, 4, 5, 6 different things that I would do differently so that I didn't achieve the same outcome. But the point is that mindset simply says, always look to the outcome and know that if it happened, you did it. Because what it does is it doesn't rob you of power, it empowers you to be able to achieve objectives that you want, because now you understand day by day that you're the one who is in control of each and every portion of what you go through. And so as I just simply give you these points, you're producing outcomes, and in short, if it happened, you're the one who did it. I mean, who do you think did? The interesting thing about it is when I talk to people who love pointing the finger at somebody else for something, I just simply think, who's the only constant in your life? I mean, you're the only constant in your life. You're there when something happened when you were 13. You're there when something happened when you were 30. You're there when something happened when you were 60. And you think somebody else did it? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. So, first issue is a commitment to personal responsibility. Never cede the authority over your life. And every time you use an excuse for something happening that isn't, you know what? I botched it. I made a mistake. Let me belly up to the bar and acknowledge it so that I can retain power to change it next time and achieve a different result in the process. Personal responsibility, number one. The second, there we go, is a commitment to being single-minded of purpose. And by single-minded of purpose, what I'm talking about is the opportunity to focus on a particular thing. What Lance didn't mention is, and when I did speak to 1 million people and all that, it almost feels like a prior lifetime. Because I did have a training program. I had not so much just a training program. I actually had a company that managed training programs. And we did a lot of different training programs, probably for names that you would actually know. And so I had an opportunity to come across a lot of people. And in the course of all of that, what I also found is that you tend to have people who bounce from one thing to another as opposed to focusing on one. And when I looked at it, and when you look at it, you kind of have to recognize that you simply cannot be a successful individual if you're bouncing from one to another. I mean, you hear about billionaires, and Jeff Bezos, right? And you hear about Elon Musk, and Elon Musk has SpaceX, and he's got Tesla, and right now he's trying to do a bullet train from Orlando to Miami. He has lots of different businesses, but let me assure you, when you come across individuals who are doing more than one business successfully, it's not because they are doing them simultaneously. They started with one business and became successful at one business, and then they bolted on from one business to another, but they were single-minded of purpose in the process. You know, I represented a man, just a wonderful man. His name was Mr. Khan. And Mr. Khan, I met Mr. Khan early on when I was a young lawyer, and he came from England. He had footwear shops in England. And he came to America, so I handled his immigration stuff, and then I handled all of his business stuff. And just very humble man, turned out to be just a great businessman, just exceptionally profitable. And he's the guy, by the way, I did all of his stuff. And he had this massive home in Isleworth, which is here in Orlando. And he ended up selling his home to Shaq O'Neal. And Shaq O'Neal is this basketball player, you know, like you probably, if you follow basketball, you probably know the name. So in any event, he sold his home to Shaq O'Neal, to Shaquille O'Neal. And we did the closing at our office in downtown Orlando. And so in the process of the closing, by the way, I've never had so many people at a closing in my whole life, right? I mean, they were coming out of the woodwork. I mean, everybody wanted to see this, you know, this famous Shaq O'Neal in my office. We have a great picture, by the way. So I had a couch in my office at the time, and so we had our entire staff, right, and the entire staff was all around, and Shaq O'Neal was sitting on the couch, right? And he was taller sitting down than all of us were standing up. I mean, he was this really tall guy. So in any event, when the festivities were over and closing was done, and more bankers than you can imagine wanted to come to see this thing, so by that point everybody was leaving, but we had not left yet. So finally, Mr. Khan and I decided we're going to go down to get a bite to eat. We go down, what we didn't realize is all the media were there. All three, ABC, CBS, NBC, they all had the cameras and so forth. And there was this one reporter, and you know, they're doing the cameras and all that, and somebody, you know, puts the microphone in front of Mr. Khan. And you know, Mr. Khan, it is an incredible, it was like a 30,000 square foot home or something like that. You know, how did you become so successful? And you know, he was a modest, humble man. And he stopped for a minute, and he kind of thought about that. How did I become so successful? And he said, well, I guess one t-shirt at a time. He had a chain of t-shirt shops all down International Drive, but these weren't t-shirt shops. These were t-shirt shops. I mean, they were like 16,000 square feet of t-shirts. And he had just simply, and they were called, matter of fact, they're still there, the gala t-shirts right around Disney and all of that. Those were all Mr. Khan's. I think he had like 14, 15, 16. And he started with his initial one that he bought when he first came here from England. And it was like selling one t-shirt at a time. He was a multi, and he passed away, multi-millionaire, one t-shirt at a time. When we take a look at, you know, there is a man, for example, who owns Christini's. And Christini's restaurant, Christini does more on that one restaurant than most people do with multiple businesses. It's one restaurant, but he's single-minded of purpose. So when we talk about the commitment of single-mindedness, what I want you to do is I want you to focus on a particular thing. And obviously you're here for a reason. I mean, you're here because and what I didn't mention is certainly, you know, in my background besides entrepreneurship, I did lots and lots of real estate. I did single family homes, and I did duplexes in the early years, and quads and apartment buildings. Generally speaking, the apartment buildings that I bought were between 12 to 18 units, which were just nice. They were boutique-ish. They weren't the great big ones out there, and they tended to have some historic value, so I used to get investment tax credits on it, and so forth. You're here for a reason, because there's opportunity in apartments, and there are opportunities in real estate that everybody has an opportunity to leverage on if you're single-minded of purpose. But if you dabble in this, and you dabble in that, and you dabble in that, you become successful at nothing. And when we talk about single-mindedness of purpose, we talk about the fact that literally And I guess the comment that I have here is, a jack of all trades, you've heard, is a master of none. And so the point that I'm simply making is, commit yourself as a second attribute of successful conduct, successful living. I would just simply ask you to commit yourself to being single-minded of purpose. And here's an opportunity. I don't have a clue as to what you've done in the past, of course. I don't know what brought you here, but I know one thing for sure: you are here. And so you're here for a reason. You're not here for no reason. And I would just simply suggest that you use this as an invitation to commit yourself to be single-minded of purpose in your opportunity to effectuate these types of successful results in your own life. Number two, the commitment to being single-minded of purpose. The third one is a commitment to being professionally competent. A commitment to being professionally competent. When I debated, by the way, going into single-family home, into senior living, I debated it for close to half a year in 2010, because I'm thinking to myself, okay, but really? I'm going to build, these are not, Tuscan Gardens at Venetia Bay, it's 136 units. We're talking, and it's memory care, 58 units of memory care, 78 units of assisted living, right? 136 units. It's a $3 to $35 million development project, construction development project. And so when I looked at that in 2010, I'm looking at, well, what would it have to look like? And that's wonderful as a vision statement. What would it have to look like? And I can chart that out. But then at the end of the day, I would tell myself, but Larry, what do you know about success? What do you know about senior living? You don't know anything about it, and you want to, it's kind of like you're dealing with seniors. It's not like our sporting goods business that I first started off with in law school, where we built 9 sporting goods stores in Orlando and Jacksonville. You're peddling Spalding basketballs. These are seniors that you're dealing with. This is not inventory, and you're thinking about doing senior living. You're nuts. So I debated with myself for 6 months, but here's what happened. What happened is, when I made a decision that I wanted to do this because I wanted to show how it could look, I finally said to myself, okay, well, you know what? I better get real serious about becoming professionally competent. And so you then begin the process of doing everything you can possibly do to know this thing like the back of your hand. Because if you know it like the back of your hand, if you know it better than everybody else, then you have the greatest competitive advantage that you could ever have. So I did everything I could possibly do. I started reading books. I started getting every trade journal for senior living. I started finding out where the conferences and the conventions were and the newsletters were. I started taking a look at the way the P&Ls operated for senior living. I started to triangulate so I could evaluate whether it was better for us to build 70 units or to build 136 units or to build 44 units, so that I could understand what was the optimal configuration with respect to how these operated. Becoming professionally competent is making sure that you understand the business like the back of your hand, so that when you execute with a confidence level that says that you've got solid, rational thought behind you. And it's not to say, by the way, that you're not going to make a mistake. Of course, I've made lots of mistakes in senior living, but because there's personal responsibility, you immediately correct the mistakes, because you know you made the first mistake to begin with, right? But professional competency basically says that if I understand the business, and if I allow myself the opportunity to be able to first learn the business from the very beginning, and then ongoing to learn that business from that point on by continuing to stay abreast of everything that's happening in the business, I end up being professionally competent. Lance, for example, you're here, and I think this is an initial training program, right? This is the first of the training programs? So you're an initial training program, and you've been exposed to the information that's here. That's fantastic. And so you master everything you possibly can here. But in addition to that, you have an opportunity to learn additional tools and to see and to mentor and to avail yourself of everything else that Lance has provided for you in this context. But the fact of the matter is, I was just at a BB&T convention, for example. BB&T is the bank. They do financing, bond financing for assisted living, and they also do them for charter schools. So I was up at, I forgot what it's called, St. Simon's Island or something like that in Georgia, something like that, which was an incredible facility. It was a beautiful facility. But man, I'm surrounded by, 150 people who have been in senior living for 20 years, who know infinitely more than I know about it. Am I not going to soak up everything I can possibly soak up by being at that convention? I go to, at this point, every convention I possibly can in the senior living space across the entire country, talk to everybody I possibly can, read everything I possibly can to make sure that there's a fundamental commitment. So the best way that I can describe it to you is a commitment to professional competency, is a commitment that says, know the business like the back of your hand. I walked in, by the way, and I had an opportunity to listen to the tape that you all listening to, going through a negotiation. And that was you, Lance, on it, right? Right. I mean, it was magnificent. I mean, it was absolutely magnificent. I mean, I'm listening to it, and Lance is just like sharpened. He's got the right tone for negotiation, and particularly for multi-unit, for apartment buildings. He's got the right tone for it. He's asking the right questions. He's talking about cap rates. He's talking about valuations. He's talking about he's talking about terms. He's talking about all the ways that you're assessing where your opportunity lies with this particular project that's in front of you, or opportunity that's in front of you. That comes from professional competency. That comes from doing. That comes from knowing the business like the back of your hand. Third attribute of successful living. Let's take a look at number 4. Is that right? There we go. Oh, there we go. The commitment to effective conduct. What I'm talking about by effective conduct, I made the observation. I've got a son who's first year in law school, and I've got another son who's a sophomore at Notre Dame, and then my youngest is Isabella, who is a ninth grade high school ninth grade. And I made the comment to Lance at lunch that Isabella specializes, she's at high school, and she specializes in consumer behavior, her own. She specializes in doing market research at Millennium Mall. That's what she specializes in, right? And she was making the comment the other day about some people, and obviously I won't mention categories of individuals who are parents of the kids that go to the school that go to. And you give them one thing, and they can't accomplish it. It's making reservations to go to Universal, and they can't get it accomplished in the course of a day, even though they're not working, and they don't have businesses and so forth, and so she's making the comment. So I happened to just mention to her, I said, listen, the best thing that you can do is you want something done, give it to a busy person. Give it to a busy person. A busy person will get it done, because a busy person has learned how to be effective. And a busy person understands how to get something accomplished by working less, by being more effective at the process. Effective conduct really is just a process. Effective conduct is a process whereby you're going to connect some dots, and the 3 parts of effective conduct are, number 1, a very clear understanding of where you are. A real clear understanding of where you are at the present time. I know that where I was, and the only reason, by the way, I'm using Tuscan Gardens is not for any reason except for the fact that it's current in my mind and it's something that I'm currently involved in. And that's the reason I bring it up. But the current reality of where I was in 2010 is I knew nothing about senior living. There was no way in the world that I could stroke a check for $35 million to build it. And there was also no way that a bank was going to finance a guy on a $35 million facility who had never been involved in senior living. I mean, that's the simple reality of where I was. But understanding the reality of where you are is an absolute first step. You have to understand what your current reality is in order for you to be effective at being able to achieve a result that you want to achieve. It's kind of like being a general in the field. You're a general in the field, you better hope that that general knows where he or she is and where the enemy are in relationship to where they are at that particular point in time. Chances are not real strong you're going to trust a general who doesn't, right? So first step in terms of effective conduct is understanding what the current reality is of where you are at that particular point in time. The second aspect of it is that you then also have to understand where you intend to be. What is the objective? So many times in meetings that we have a weekly PMR meeting where we review everything. And in the course of it, we always find ourselves asking the same question. Okay, so what is the outcome that we're looking for? What do we want to have happen? We're going to be having a meeting with this particular organization. What do we want to have happen? What's the vision for it? When I sat there with a notepad in July of 2010, it was only when I wrote down, here's what it would have to look like. This is what it's about. If it's not going to be that, then it's not worth doing at all, from my standpoint. So here's my current reality, here's where my vision is, and now it's a question of connecting the dots. And the dots are connected by an actual implementation plan. So the implementation plan connects those two dots in a reality, in a way which allows the two of them to be connected. And by the way, I'm not talking about motivational stuff. I'm talking about very clear-cut implementation steps. What are the implementation steps? First of all, what are my OCRs? What are my objective critical results? What are the outcomes that I intend to achieve? And the implementation plan is now designed to put those in place. It's not motivational. It's Music Man. Remember Music Man? Does anybody remember Music Man? Am I dating myself? Yes, yes. I got acknowledgement that I'm dating myself. So what happens in the Music Man, by the way, so it's this musical that, from I think lands 1890 to 1900, something like that. But we saw it personally. So the Music Man, so he's going to create, because Poole is coming to River City, so he's going to create a marching band or something like that for the city of River City. And of course, the only problem is nobody can play. But he's going to, so he's going to motivate them into playing. And so there's a great scene where he gets the instruments and all of that, and they just simply, they think it. So he has the think system of playing, so that they just simply think the music and therefore they play. Broadway works that way, right? Life doesn't work that way. So an implementation plan that I'm suggesting for you is very specifically, step number one, here's what we're going to do. Here's where we are, here's where we need to be. In order for me to be able to solve, here's what I have to solve. I got to, first of all, educate myself 100% to make sure I understand what the levers are. Number two, I understand that I have a financial problem here. I'm going to have to solve for the financial problem in the following ways. I'm going to have to get some people on my executive team that have senior living experience, because I know that I'm not going to be able to convince any lending authority is going to give me a loan unless I have that expertise in the executive team for Tuscan Gardens. I also understand that I need to make sure that I have the right architect that shares my vision. And I need to make sure that I have a contractor that has very substantial experience in building senior living, and so forth and so on. What I just described to you is an implementation plan. The way that I manifested that implementation plan for Tuscan Gardens is I created an enterprise charter. The enterprise charter literally became the business plan for Tuscan Gardens, all the way down to a description of the size of the rooms that we were going to be building and the configuration for those rooms. That implementation plan, how nice. What a pleasant. Yes, I think it's at Tuscan Gardens right now. So in any event, the implementation plan allows you to get from the original, the concept of it, oh, there it is, it's over there, right? The actual current reality of where you are to where you're going to be. And it allows you to get there. You know what? You fly a plane. For those of you who are flying home, the pilot, they know where they're taking off from, right? I know it's a shocker to you. They know where they're taking off from. They know in advance where they're going to land. That's a real shocker, right? They know where they're going to land, and they actually file a thing called a flight plan. That is the exact route that they're going to fly from getting from where they are to where they're going to land. Doesn't get much better than that, right? Effective conduct is understanding your current reality, the vision that you want to achieve, and connecting the dots with a very specific implementation plan to get there. Number 5, there we go, is a commitment to perseverance. It's a commitment to perseverance. The way that I would best describe that is to give yourself the chance to be successful. And I'm not being presumptuous, by the way. There are, I'm sure, lots of you in the room who have very successful backgrounds, have achieved substantial levels of success in what you have done before being in this room today. But at the same time, I've come across in my life individuals that every time they're just about to seize onto something, they end up changing their minds, or they end up doing something different. I mean, and I come across that all the time. There's a guy, by the way, who just hit me on LinkedIn. And I haven't talked to this guy for 15, 20 years. I haven't been on LinkedIn for very long, so he must have found me on LinkedIn. I've been there maybe 6 months on LinkedIn. So his name is Ken, by the way. And I used to come across him all the time in downtown Orlando. And every time I talked to him, it was kind of like, hey, Ken, how you doing? I'm doing great, Larry. I'm doing fantastic. And I said, okay, well, good. So what's up? And he says, listen, I am distributing water purifiers. And I'm telling you, it is, here, he pulls a glass out of his pocket. Downtown Orlando, he's got a glass in his pocket. He pulls a glass out of his pocket and he goes, have you ever taken a glass of water and looked inside the glass of water? No, Ken, I haven't done that. He said, I drink the water, Ken. So he says, you got to do that, Larry. I am telling you, this water purifier will take every single inch of that stuff out of there. You'll be pure crystal water from now on. Can I come show you? Absolutely, Ken. By all means, come show me your water purifier. And of course, I know he's not, right? 6 months later, I see him on the street. Hey, Ken, how you doing? I'm doing great. Larry, it couldn't be better. It's like, okay, water purifier? Nah, forget about that. That's also yesterday, right? And he's going to pitch me on, something else, and I don't even remember anymore what he's going to pitch me on. And then I see him the next time, and it's kind of like, Larry, it is doing fantastic. I got to come see you. And I said, Ken, by all means, I want you to come see me. Right? He just LinkedIn me, 20 years later, right? I mean, it's kind of like, man, just give yourself a chance to be successful. I mean, pick a direction and just take the direction. I mean, you're all here right now. You're sitting through, unless you have nothing to do at home, and that's why you're here. You have nothing to do at home. You have nothing happening in your life. So you've chosen to be here sitting with Lance for 3 days listening to this, right? I mean, you're here for a reason. I mean, give yourself, this is 3 days of an initial boot camp teaching you the fundamental skills of how to be successful with respect to retail apartments or I call multi-unit apartment buildings. So give yourself the chance to be successful at it. These attributes that you see here are designed for exactly that purpose. And so in the process of doing that, you want to make sure that you take a straight line and you stay on that straight line. It's not like every single time, you get yourself on a highway. The only way you create momentum in your life is by getting on a highway, not by city streets. So give yourself the opportunity, get yourself on the highway, and don't take an exit ramp. As a matter of fact, if you want to take an exit ramp, you can, but how about challenging yourself? How about giving yourself the fundamental self-commitment that says, I will not take an exit ramp with respect to this business. I will not take an exit ramp unless I am incredibly successful at it. Give yourself the right to get off the highway by allowing yourself the opportunity to be successful at what you're currently doing. And so when I talk about this level of perseverance, I'm talking about the opportunity by being, if you will, single-minded of purpose and commitment, and giving yourself the opportunity, the way that I say it here is that you've earned the right by being successful at what you are currently doing. And what you're currently doing at this juncture is what you're here to learn. Give yourself the opportunity to be successful at it. And you know what? I have been involved in real estate, and I have been involved, there is no better leveraged activity out there in so many ways. After all, 30, 40 years after being in real estate for the very first time, guess what? I'm in real estate again at a much bigger level. And now I'm talking about $35 million buildings, and the one we're building in Del Rey is $44 million. And it's all real estate that I never would have thought about in 2010, but I've given myself the opportunity to stick in. And let me tell you, it was like pushing a boulder uphill from 2010 to 2012 to 2013. We didn't find our first piece of property that I was able to actually close on until 2014, 4 years later. Now, having said that, now the momentum is huge, but it took that long before that boulder finally got flat, before now it's actually rolling downhill, assisting us in the process. So give yourself the chance to stay on the highway until such time as you have the chance to be successful, and then you can make whatever choice you want at that point. Let me talk about two final ones. And this is going to, these next two, by the way, I want to tell you that they are 100% part of who I am and a commitment. I mean, every morning, I don't know how many of you sort of do your thing, you sort of set yourself for the day and you do maybe your litany of, some of you might do prayers, and some of you might incorporate maybe self-affirmations. However you do it, whatever your self-talk is. Every morning I do a self-talk, and I kind of go through a litany of things, and it's kind of a process that I go through to get ready for the day. It's always when I'm dressed and ready to go, and so I sometimes quiet and sometimes maybe on the way to work at a church, but there's always a little, kind of a litany, and these next 2 points are 2 points that are part of that process. So I just simply suggest these to you. The first is the concept of integrity. And what I mean by that, there are some universals, right? We know there is such a thing as universal truth. We know that, right? However you manifest that, because it's not intended to be a religious talk, but you manifest truth in every way. But we do know one thing. Whatever you call it, there is such a thing as an absolute truth. And so there is a reason why gravity works the way it works. And there is a reason that if you get yourself under a boulder, you will be hurt. So it is absolute truth. Integrity is the process whereby you live your life as close as you possibly can aligned with truth. And that is at every level. That's in life, that's in business, it's in personal relationships, but it's a mindfulness that says that you need to make sure on a day-by-day basis that you are aligning yourself as best as you can, based upon the limitations of who we are as human beings, with truth. And it is the way that you deal with each other, it's the way that you deal with a personal situation, it's the way that you deal with other people. Have a situation that I had a conversation with about a occurrence which is occurring. That is a really difficult one for this particular person. And I said, at the end of that, I said, whatever your decision is your decision, of course. You just have to recognize that when that decision is made, you have no choice except to be clear in communicating honestly what that result is going to look like. You can't allow a lack of truthfulness to go uncommunicated, because that's going to come back to haunt you. So whether you believe in a karma or whether you believe in any of that other stuff, the sense of integrity is the sense that says that I'm going to do everything in my power to align myself with truth on a day-by-day basis. And when the best thing that I can say about that is that you just simply cannot be successful unless you have allowed that integrity to be part and parcel of what your life looks like. And then the final comment that I made, I already told you, which is just simply, I think that with respect to all of these, you have the opportunity to be able to create them into a daily process. If you don't do a daily process, I might recommend it to you. But certainly integrity becomes one of those. One final one, and I think that the final one is something that I would suggest to you. It's called a commitment to love and caring. And it is the flip side. There are two absolutes, right? Here's what we know as an absolute. Absolute on a universal basis is truth, and an absolute on a universal basis is love. And so we probably are better off, don't you think, aligning ourselves with those with respect to how we live our lives, allowing ourselves to be in line with integrity and in line with love. And the way that manifests, by the way, in business, in business, integrity just simply aligns yourself by saying, you understand what the truth is. Like, for example, I absolutely refuse to recut a deal. I won't do it. There's a retrade in business that's called retrading. We have a commitment to each other that I'm going to do what I do and you're going to do what you do, and we sign a contract and all that. And then 2 weeks out before the closing occurs, we have a change of terms. We have a change of circumstances because of this and because of this. It's not worth this. So let's talk about another price. I absolutely refuse to retrade. I won't do it. Because from my standpoint, a person has a right to rely on what you said. And so from a sense of integrity, if I said it, it will be. It may not be at all because circumstances prevented it from occurring, but I will not say something that I am not prepared to commit, and I'm not going to say something that evokes a reliance and create a scenario in which I'm going to come back and have to give you reasons why it couldn't be. I just won't do it from an integrity standpoint. The love side of it is the motivation by which you do something. You can do things in a self-serving way. I'm doing these things in a self-serving way, or you can do them if you're other-serving. You're serving the other person on an ongoing basis. And love, the way love manifests in a business environment, is that you're doing things for other people. Now, that's not to say, by the way, that you're not going to make a profit. Of course, business needs a profit. So you have to structure your business affairs so that you have a P&L and there's money left over at the end of that P&L. So that's perfectly okay. But what I'm talking about is the motivation by which you get there. And I'm suggesting to you that you can be committed to serving the other person in a transaction and yet at the same time achieve successful results. I, for example, go into a negotiation very differently than virtually every partner I've ever had in any business. Every partner goes into a business transaction with, let's lowball, and then we get their response, and then somehow we'll work it out in between. I don't. I just don't do that. Because if I'm doing it with a lowball offer, then what I'm effectively doing is I'm self-serving. On the other hand, if I know that there is a fair valuation, and that fair valuation is here, I'm going to go in with a fair valuation, period. So my negotiations have ranges like this, not like this, because I'm not prepared to go into a negotiation with, what's a fair price for this? The fair price is $175,000. Oh, well then let's go in with $140,000. So that when they counter, we can end up somewhere around there. Said, how about a better idea? Why don't we go in with what we think the real value is? So if the real value, and if we're prepared to pay $175, let's pay $175. How about that? Well, Larry, but then they're going to come back with, no. I said, no, that's just narrative. That's nothing other than narrative. So when you go into a negotiation that basically says, Ron, Ron, and I know how the game is played, and I know typically the way an offer is made, and I'm going to lowball you, and you're going to come back with some other price, and we're going to settle in between. Let me just tell you how I do it. I do it based on what I absolutely believe the value of this property is, and that's what I'm going to buy it at. That's what I'm going to offer it at. And if you agree with me that is, and I hope that you do, then our conversation is going to be a very, very short conversation. If you set it up with a narrative that works so the other person understands what your rules are, then you have an opportunity to be able to get there in a much better way. I operate with a partner who, literally, it's scorched earth. He'll go through negotiations, but he produces scorched earth behind him. Because by the time that he's finished, they may or may not end up at the end, but I will guarantee that they have been completely offended at the process. And so when you're doing it, I'm not talking about it here as a technique. I'm talking about it as the result of a mindset. And if the mindset is suggesting that you're going in with an other-serving mentality with respect to how you achieve something, you know, the people on the other end, they find out pretty quickly. It's just like it's like a jury. I used to make the comment that, you know what, juries get the truth. They get the truth. You know, you can try to do all the razzmatazz and you can do all the style stuff, but they have an innate sense of the truth. If you go into your discussions and into your business dealings with a sense of being genuinely other-serving for its own reward, the other person finds out and feels it pretty quickly. So when I take a look at this, I just simply suggest that the reward comes from the value that you're bringing to the other people. It's the value, I guess that was just two there, huh? Yeah, it's the value that you bring to the other person who's in that transaction, and that becomes the motivator. So, real briefly, and I'm probably not only out of time, I may be actually past time, I'm not sure. So let me just simply give you a real quick recap. You know, number one, a commitment to personal responsibility simply says that you operate with an understanding that if it happened, you did it. And what it allows you to do is stay in power and in control of your life because you clearly recognize that you're the one who is actually creating the circumstances of your life. Number two, be single-minded of purpose so that when you're dealing with something, you're dealing with something with a real commitment level so that you actually move the needle on an ongoing basis. Number three, give yourself the commitment to professional competency. Learn that business like the back of your hand and stay completely current with that business so that you know it better than anybody around you, and that's what gives you your competitive advantage over them. Commitment to effective conduct. Here's where I am, here's where I want to be, and here's my very specific implementation plan to get there. Number five, allow yourself the opportunity to stay on a highway and don't get off the highway. You're committed to this, make it happen, be successful at it. And then in the process of doing that, once you're successful, then you've earned your right to go do something else, maybe in addition to or instead of. Number six, commit yourself to integrity. And integrity just simply means aligning your day-to-day life in a way which is aligned with truth at every aspect. Truth in your business dealings, truth with respect to what comes out of your mouth, and truth with respect to what doesn't come out of your mouth. And commit yourself, finally, to a commitment to love and caring, or said differently, to being other-serving with respect to your motivations and with respect to what your fundamental personal commitment level is. And those are the 7 points. And I'm happy, by the way, to answer any questions or go in whatever direction you want to go in.
Great. Who has some questions for Larry? This is a great opportunity.
Yeah.
One of the challenges I found was that you would like to follow the rules and the other side doesn't, but yet you really need that deal, you really feel that in order for you to get through to that person, something else has to happen. How do I find what to do in this kind of situations?
Can you give me a for instance?
For example, I have a friend, and she was taught to sell timeshares to people who cannot afford it. She became so good in the training that she started cheating people. And she said, Victoria, you have to kill them. Have no mercy. If they come here, that means they're already halfway to be sold. They sold half of their mindset. In fact, I don't think so. The fact that they train you some
Right.
linguistic, tricks, and they train you some how to use, other people's sensitivity or some weak points. Oh, you have to find their buttons, you have to find their weak points. All these psychological tricks that she learned from the company. And you just after that slaughter them.
Yeah. No, I get it.
How do you do that?
Yeah, so No, great. I mean, it's a great question because it's there. And you know, I can only tell you, and this is maybe one area where if I had not been successful at business, and if I had not been successful at anything that I did, then potentially you could look at this and say, yeah, all right, Larry, yeah. But the truth of the matter is, I do have the experience that I have. And I did produce the results that I produced. And I did produce those results with these types of commitments, right? So by definition, I think that I'm here as a witness that it works. And when I talk about, I come across that type of situation all the time. And I don't really view it in a terribly evangelical way. I mean, the fact of the matter is, when confronted with that, the chances of me converting that other person in a way where they're going to be responsive to this is pretty slim to none. So I'm probably not going to find it to be terribly valuable to spend a whole lot of time doing it. Now, I might set out, as I did, for example, that comment that I talked about, this scorched earth guy, literally came from a very recent circumstance. And the fact of the matter is, we did not get the deal that we could have gotten simply because when I wanted to go in with a real value offer, he absolutely wanted to go in with a below, just a below offer just to see if they'll take it. And I said, you have to be careful because you're setting a foundation for what is going to be the further future communication. We could never recover. We couldn't recover because they absolutely mistrusted our good faith when we come in with that type of ridiculous lowball offer for this. So we were never able to recover, and they did turn us down at the end. As opposed to an offer where I will come in with, and if at the end of the day, Ron doesn't think it's a fair offer, okay, it's something that reasonable people will reasonably differ on. That's okay, but at least he's not going to walk away offended that I was trying to take advantage of him. Okay? So I'm probably not going to be able to convince her that there's a better way. I might say it. I might say, you know what, it's probably not going to be terribly successful, and I'm not certainly willing to execute that way. And if that's successful for you, then I suppose you can continue to do it. I would just simply say, though, that there is an alignment. I call it integrational, by the way, integrational processing. You never start with the business. You start with the person. And you start with the person. You understand who's inside first. And I'm talking about you now, not the other person in the transaction. Start with who you are here, yourself. And then you extend yourself into a business. And then from that business, you extend yourself into the market. Right? And you choose a position in the market that you're going to build your business. That's called integrational processing, okay? Which was sort of a chapter in the first book that I ever wrote, which was called Finding Your Niche, okay? And that integrational processing says, message to her would be, I don't find that to be a very valuable technique, number one, but also number two, I don't find it to be a technique that's particularly comfortable and aligned with who I feel myself to be. And now you can choose do whatever you want to do, but but in terms of the sale of the timeshare, but that's not something that I would feel comfortable effectuating. Would be the best that you can do. But that's about all. I mean, I don't find myself, other than that, I don't find and then from my standpoint, it's real simple. I'm not going to be doing any deals with that person. So, right, that goes without saying that I'm not going to be doing any deals with the person. So I just sort of continue on in my life trundling along, recognizing that this person has been marginalized.
Just to
take one other question. One other question for Larry.
Yeah, I know. From what I said, you were quite successful in small to medium-sized apartments. Why did you not continue and go into bigger and bigger apartments? Why did you decide to go into senior living? What was the thinking there?
Oh, first of all, that was early on. So when I was involved with So actually, I started. Lance knows the story. I was lawyering, and I started representing a guy named Charles J. Gibbons, and he had one of the original programs called Money Strategies for the '80s. So I was representing him as his lawyer, and he wanted somebody who would start teaching his one-day program, and they would teach business, and I was very comfortable in business. taxes, stuff like that, investments, and I was comfortable in investments, and real estate. But I hadn't done any real estate. But the only thing that he was doing is he was doing single-family homes. That's what he was teaching. He was teaching the famous 10-10-10 rule on single-family homes. And I didn't feel comfortable teaching something that I hadn't done. So I went out and I bought, literally over a 5-6 month period of time, I bought 18 resident single-family homes. And then I bought several duplexes and several quads, and so that I could teach with integrity, right? So that I could teach stuff that I knew based on what I was actually doing myself. So I knew what worked. I knew what offers were accepted. I knew what offers would not be accepted because I was actually out there doing it. So out of that, I got exposed to small apartment buildings. And it was an extension, if you will, because the per unit, obviously when you're dealing with multi-unit, the per unit cost goes down, which means you have a greater opportunity for yield. All the things that you're learning here. So it was very successful for me and all of that. On the other hand, what I was also doing is I was doing enterprise. I was doing a lot of businesses. At one point in time, I had 7 restaurants. Yeah, I told my friends, if I ever do another restaurant, just shoot me. Just shoot me, because I obviously went out of my mind, so just shoot me, it's okay. So I was getting more and more actively involved in businesses, and as a result of that, I just kind of went in the direction of business. So it was not any dissatisfaction with the real estate. As a matter of fact, how I exited the real estate investment activities, which is what ultimately got me into the first training program that I was doing called National Mortgage Investors Institute, is I sold all the real estate with wraparound mortgages. So by selling all the real estate with wraparound mortgages, very little down, so just enough down to keep them honest, and the promissory note obviously gave me an opportunity to charge a higher price on the sale of the real estate, and I had an arbitrage because it was a wraparound. So if the underlying mortgage was in those days 8%, my wrap was going to be at 10%. So I had an arbitrage with respect to the note itself. So it was very successful. So I ended up, by the way, going into my business operations with a nice cash flow that came from having sold all the real estate and taken back notes. But no, the reality is the real estate, by the way, one last comment, real estate has always been good to me, whether it was apartment buildings or it was office buildings and so forth, to the point that the restaurants that I described never made a dime on the restaurants, but I always made money on the real estate. So, right? Because all of the restaurants that I had, I owned the underlying real estate. So it was always very, very worthwhile. So bottom line is, I think that you are in a great position here. And that's as I take a look at it, and you sort of wrap these points here, it's kind of like, hey, you're at a banquet, just take advantage of the banquet. And you have a tremendous opportunity at this point to make good solid money, good solid income, but also, as you get into the ownership side, the ability to be able to build wealth. Lance, you okay? All right, thank you very much, guys. I enjoyed being with you.